Hi guys, it's Nicole. Welcome back to another video, and today is my October wrap up, which I am just so excited to do because in October I finally got my reading mojo back. I read over 10 books and it's been months since I've been successful in reading over 10 books, and it just feels so good to be making time for reading a booktube again. So yeah, excited to get into these today. So the first book I want to talk about is a novella, short story. I think it's a novella, but that is The Empress of Salt and Fortune. Now, I honestly read this because Tammy told me to. More than once, but also because I really trust Tammy's taste. This did not disappoint. I really enjoyed this, and I kind of feel like a bit of a hypocrite because I know in my last wrap up I went on about how short stories aren't for me, da 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 da. I did say short fiction stories weren't for me, but I wanted to give fantasy books or fantasy short stories a go, and I'm so glad I did give this a go because I loved it so much. I think this also helped me figure out the kind of short stories or novellas that I liked, because this wasn't a plot heavy story. It was really more focused on these characters and the themes and the setting. We follow this cleric called She, and they go to this old house. I don't think house is really the right word to describe it, but this old property that used to belong to the royal family. And there she meets this old lady called Rabbit, and Rabbit starts to tell Chi her story. She grew up and spent a lot of her life in the royal palace and was close with the Empress, and this book is just this old lady telling her life story to this young cleric, and it is so cozy and wholesome. Tammy said to me before I picked up this book that it's a really feminist novel, and it really is, and I liked it because it's a very quiet sort of feminism. It shows the conflict of what these women had to go through in the palace and how men ruled their lives and were in charge of their lives, but then it also shows how these women had relationships with one another and how they found strength in one another and relied on one another, and it's just so beautiful. I am definitely planning to read the sequel to this because this is a series of novellas and it's just stunning. The writing's stunning, the story's stunning, the characters are stunning, and I really loved how the story unfolded as well. It was so impressive with the narrative. This is one of those books where you really appreciate the writing craft that went into the story, and I love this. Highly recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. I also read another novella which I gave 4 stars, which is The Haunting of Tramcar 015. This is a prequel novella to A Master of Djinn. I really love the setting of this book and this world. It's a really interesting mix of fantasy and steampunk. There's Djinn, there's ghosts, there's all sorts of supernatural creatures, and we basically just follow this investigator trying to figure out what is haunting this tramcar. I don't want to say too much because it's a novella, but I think this novella, as well as the other novella for this series, which is A Dead Djinn in Cairo, are both a really great introduction to this world. And I should just mention quickly that I did start A Master of Djinn. I didn't complete it. I got 86 pages in, so I didn't make that much of an impressive effort. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I'm really glad that we're following Fatma, who is the main character in A Dead Djinn in Cairo, because she has been my favorite character that we've been introduced to so far in this world. And again, there's kind of a murder mystery that's going on, so I really love the combination of genres, like the fantasy and the murder mystery here as well, and also the steampunk and just the other elements that are added, and it really just does create quite a vivid story. I just ended up neglecting this because honestly there's been a vlog I've been working on for most of October, and I've been focusing on my physical reading for that vlog, and this just kind of got neglected. I did buddy read Haunting of Tramcar with Sophia, and we're also buddy reading this, and we're somehow so in sync that we keep neglecting this book. So I'm hoping we both finish this in November, because I definitely really want to finish this before the end of the year. I also completed at the very beginning of October my best friend's Exorcism. I didn't love this one too much, unfortunately. I gave it 2 stars. I really love the start. In the beginning, we're introduced to these two young girls and we see how they become friends, and then we sort of watch them grow up to teenagers and how their friendship evolves throughout the years. So Abby's the main character, and Abby's best friend Gretchen, like the title suggests, gets possessed by a demon, and then she starts acting up, and eventually it leads to her exorcism. I think there was a couple of things that just annoyed me about this book. Was, first of all, the title like tells you the whole story, and I just didn't appreciate the lead up or the story or the journey. I think what made me struggle to appreciate it was a lot of the conflict that Gretchen was causing in the beginning while she was possessed was sort of mean girl related. She was spreading a lot of lies and rumors, sort of trying to get with like other girls' boyfriends. It just felt very Mean Girls, and I just was not here for it. I was really just hoping for more like grotesque horror stuff, which definitely did happen towards the latter third of the story, but for the most part of the book, particularly like the first half, it was so Mean Girls focused, and I just wasn't here for it. And obviously with the lead up to the exorcism, it just didn't feel worthwhile or satisfying. I don't know, I feel like I just missed the point of this book, because I know so many people love this, but unfortunately it was not the book for me. I am contemplating giving this author another go in the future. I then read The Traitor Queen, which is the sequel to The Bridge Kingdom. I just randomly picked this up because I was in the mood for a fantasy romance. Even though I didn't love the first book in this series, I think I was kind of a little bit harsh on my opinion on that, to be honest, but I just really was in the mood for this, and I saw that it was available on the Audible Plus catalog thing they have on at the moment, or just started, and I just downloaded it and I listened to it in a couple of days. I really enjoyed this. The premise of the first book is we have this girl called Lara who has been raised sort of in isolation but amongst all her sisters. So she has like a bunch of sisters, and they are all the king's daughters, but they all have different mothers, and the king has raised these daughters with the intention that one of them, the strongest of them, will marry a prince from a neighboring kingdom and then assassinate that prince. So they're basically being raised as assassins, and Lara is the daughter that ends up marrying this prince. And the reason her father wants his kingdom in particular is because they have this bridge and they get a lot more access to resources, and it just provides a lot of wealth for the kingdom, so the father sort of wants that for himself. So we have an enemies to lovers arranged marriage set up. The main reason why the first book didn't work for me was because the romance developed way too quickly. They went from like enemies to lovers way too fast. There was no really breathing period, and I did really want to continue on because the first book does end on a cliffhanger, and I'm so glad I did. I really enjoyed the second book. We got to learn a lot more about like Lara's upbringing and her background with her father, the king, and sort of his intentions, and there was a lot more like politics happening in the world. And I didn't realize until I finished this book and looked at Goodreads, but apparently it's going to be a 5-book series, so I'm very interested to see how it's going to continue. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this. It was just like honestly a fun time, and I read this in between a lot of like heavier fantasy books, which I think also just made me appreciate it so much more because it was such a light and easy fun read. I gave it 3 stars in the end. I also listened to the audiobook of The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. Now I was not the greatest fan of like particularly the previous book in this series, and I didn't think I was going to continue. Honestly, I was just curious because originally this series was supposed to be a trilogy, and now it's going to be continued on. I don't know how many books, like how many more books they're going to be. So I was just kind of interested honestly to see how Maureen Johnson was planning to continue the series. I will say I did like this one I think better than The Hand of the War, which is book 3, which was originally supposed to be the final book. I was expecting this book to have a similar setup to how the first 3 books was done, because in the first 3 books each book kind of had its own mystery, but then there was one mystery that expanded over the 3 books, and I thought she was going to do another like trilogy with a mystery that kind of goes all the way through, but I don't think that's the case. I think this was just its own mystery, and I think that's why it worked so much better than the other books, because the other mystery, the original mystery, was just so drawn out to an unnecessary point, and then it just got unsatisfying in the end. I can't say too much, I don't think, about this book because it is book 4 in a series, but basically all the same characters are there. They're not at their school setting though, they're at a camp setting, and again there is a murder happened in the past that Stevie, the main character, is trying to solve. It was a really easy audiobook to listen to, like I think I got through it in like 2 days. So if you're looking for like a quick read that's a mystery, it is a decent one. I really didn't sell that book, did I? The next mystery thriller I want to talk about that I really enjoyed is The Escape Room. I picked this up because I read one of the author's other books in September and I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to give this one a go, and I'm so glad I did. I will say the beginning of this I thought was a little wonky. I don't know if it was just like my problem of struggling to get into the book, or if it was the writing or the storytelling, because there are 2 POVs. So at first you're just kind of thrown in and you don't really know what's going on. You have this one POV where, you know, there are these 4 characters who have gone into this elevator to play this escape room game. Escape rooms are basically where you go into an elevator and you're supposed to solve like riddles and puzzles, and then you end up getting like a code that will, like, you can put into a passcode and you're free to exit the escape room or elevator. And then in the second POV we follow Sarah, who is this young woman struggling to make meets ends. She's struggling to find a job, she's trying to find a job in finance, she's like dealing with a lot of like sexism, and then she ends up finding like basically her dream job, and it's in New York, and she gets the job and she ends up moving to New York. But the company at first seems like so perfect, so ideal, but it's definitely a lot more sinister on the inside, and everyone's like very greedy. There are so many shitty characters. Like pretty much everyone in this book is like a really shitty character, but I really enjoyed this. I really loved how political this book was. There was a lot of office politics that was going on. There's also a lot of interpersonal politics. I don't know how to sell this to you, but it's definitely like one of my favorite thrillers I've read this year. I feel like some people might find the ending a little bit unsatisfying, but I personally really enjoyed it, and I just really enjoyed all the conflict between all these characters. A lot of these characters are driven by greed to the point where they will do anything to get what they want, and it's kind of terrifying, especially in terms of what power they have. I wouldn't recommend this book for those who don't want to read about like bullying or sexism and like discrimination in the workplace, because there is a lot of that, and I think it was just so interesting to me because I don't work in an office, so I just found it fascinating. But I feel like some people might get really turned off by that, and I definitely plan to read more by this author because I really like how she writes her mysteries and thrillers. They're quite different to what... Well, I don't know how different they are to other thrillers because I'm so new to thrillers, but they're different to the ones I have read, and they are ones that I kind of want to find more of. So yeah, I definitely recommend that one. I gave it like 3.75 4 stars in the end. It was a good one. I also in October finally continued reading Robin Hobb. I read Dragon Keeper. I don't know how to talk about this book. This book was not what I expected. It is literally Bridgerton and dragons. That is literally the only way I can describe this book, and I was kind of very shocked going into this because it's so different. Like the vibes of this are so different to how the rest of Robin Hobb's books are. It kind of threw me for a loop. I have heard this is her like least popular series, or at least least popular series within the realm of the Outerlings series, and I can see why. I was also expecting when I picked this up that we were going to follow characters that we were introduced to in the live ship Traitor series. In that trilogy we are introduced to the Rainwilders, who are very closely linked to like the magic of this world, and I thought we were going to follow those characters, but we actually follow a whole set of new characters. However, we do come across and meet and see some of the characters from the live shoot Traitor series, so I was really happy for those cameos. But I think I was kind of disappointed because I was expecting to follow characters I already knew and love, but we didn't get that. And then the whole like Bridgerton vibes, I was not expecting. I was just thrown out for a loop for that, to be honest. I did overall enjoy this, and I really can't say too much because I think this is like book 12 or something in the series technically. A couple of things I do want to add though: huge content warning for rape and sexual assault. Literally in the early chapters you see rape and sexual assault, and I do want to point out something that I've noticed that Robin Hobb does, and this is the second time she does it. There's a lot of characters in here, right, where they're not canon queer, but like me and like particularly my friend Katie talk about it, and they give off a lot of like queerness. So there's all these characters we're shipping that, you know, aren't canon. There's been a couple of canon gay men so far, and we had another canon gay man introduced in here, and what I really didn't like was, like with the other one we had from another series of hers, this man in here was an asshole and a rapist, and it just felt quite homophobic. I'm not gonna lie. So heads up for that. It was just disappointing because it's like the second time it's happened where we have a gay man who is like very problematic. Yeah, I don't want to read about that. Otherwise, it is a really fun time, and I gave it 3 stars in the end. Oh my god, my battery's flashing. I'm not done though. I have so many more books to talk about. So, for some reason, the universe is determined for this video not to happen, because when I got ready to film this video, it started raining right after I was ready to start filming. So hard, and the wind was so hard that I couldn't film, so then I had to wait. Then I was filming and my camera just died, so it's a little bit later now. I had to wait for my battery to charge because I only have one, so the lighting is different because I have to use my ring light. So we're just gonna power through because the universe is not winning today. I am winning. I want to get this video done. The next book I want to talk about is another short like story I read. I can't believe how many short stories I read when I went on like such a tangent last month about how much I didn't like them, but here we are. I'm sorry, I'm a hypocrite. I seriously am sometimes. The story I read was Killjoys by Holly Jackson. Now this is a short prequel which is part of Holly Jackson's Good Girl Guide to Murder trilogy, so this is a prequel to that. This short story basically just gives a look into why Pip decided to look into the murder case that she does in the series and what led her to that decision. Someone in the comments very kindly told me that this existed, and I'm so glad I know, and I'm so glad I read it because I love these characters so much. I didn't give it a rating, I don't think, but like if I was to give it a rating, I would just give it 5 stars because I just love all the characters. And to read this after the series, when you know all these characters and you love them, it was just like so good to like revisit them one last time. And it was kind of also sad because you know what these characters have been through like post, like after the series, and like they haven't been through all that shit yet. So that was kind of a little bit of emotional, but I really enjoyed it. I do recommend starting with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder if you do plan to read the series and not this short story, even though it is a prequel. I just don't think you will get much out of this prequel unless you've read the trilogy yourself and you want something extra. I think this prequel is really just for people like me who like adored the series because of the characters. I highly recommend this if you love A Good Girl's Guide to Murder like me. It was really good. I don't know why I keep doing that today. I also read 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. Now this was my first Peter Swanson and I did like it, but I gave it 3 stars in the end. I think I really enjoyed the setup and like the first half of the book, and then the second half of the book was a little bit of a letdown in terms of where the direction of the story went. The protagonist of the story is a bookshop owner. He owns a bookshop that only sells like thrillers and murder mysteries and those sort of books, and one day a FBI agent comes in to question him because a few years ago on his blog he made a post about 8 perfect murders, and this blog post was just basically a list he had compiled of books he believed to have included or have the perfect murders, and there's 8 of them. Something I will say, heads up, is if you pick up this book, there's a lot of spoilers for other books. So it talks about The Secret History by Donna Tartt, it talks about the ABC murders by Agatha Christie, it also talks about a few other books by Agatha Christie, and there were other books it also discussed, and it discussed them in detail that it will spoil the book for you, which I don't know how to feel about. I kind of get slightly annoyed when books do that because I'm just someone who's like so anti-spoilers. I really don't like being spoiled. Just a warning, like if you read this book, just know that there are other books it will spoil you for. So the FBI has come in to question this man because she thinks that someone has found his list on his blog post and is now going around murdering people using the same methods or ways that these murders were done in the book. Yeah, so she's trying to uncover this case and she thinks this bookshop guy can offer some insight, and we go kind of from there, and that's all I can really say. I loved the setup, I loved the start, and I loved the setup, but I think that the ending or the second half just wasn't as satisfying. It's interesting now talking about this because thinking about it, I remember the first half much more strongly than I remember the second half, which I think just is a bit of a testament to how much I liked the book, or like what parts of the book I preferred. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars in the end, and I'm definitely keen to try more Peter Swanson. I have heard really great things by him, and there was enough that he did in this book that I liked that makes me want to give like more of his books a go. So the rest of the books I'm going to talk about in this wrap up are all books I read for vlogs, so I will have the vlogs linked in the description box and also up in the cards. Let's talk about these. I reread The Poppy War and The Dragon Republic for my TBR completion project vlog, and I'm so glad I finally got around to rereading these. These are definitely some of my favorite books. I adore them. I love the characters. Like, that's definitely my favorite thing about them. And it's just so intense, so political. I love how much of history this draws upon as well. So I'm going to give a brief summary. I just feel like I talk about this book and this series so much that I shouldn't go too in depth because people are going to be like, oh, here we are again. Anyway, here we are again. The Poppy War follows Rin, who is a war orphan who lives in a country peasant sort of village. She lives with a foster family. She has to work a shop. She has a pretty shitty life, and her family do plan to marry her off to a much older man, and she doesn't want that. She doesn't want that life. So in order to avoid that life and to make a life for herself, she works her butt off and gets into a military academy where she basically trains to become a soldier. It's really, really ruthless. The first half of this book is set at the school, and then the rest of the book and really the rest of the series is actually to do with war. I think what I love about what this book does is the view that Rin and her friends have of war before they go to it. You see them at the school and how idealistic they really are about war and how they're just really children and they don't really know what they're talking about, and then you see them go to war and the trauma and like the sacrifice, like the real sacrifices they have to do. I love this. It's so emotional. I love Rin. She's definitely like one of my favorite characters ever. I love how ruthless she is. I love how she doesn't hold back. She's so unhinged. Like, she is the most unhinged character I've ever read about, which makes her like quite scary to read from because you don't know what she's going to do next. She's so unpredictable. And the sequel I think is even better than the first book. I really love this because of the politics. It's got a lot of military politics, a lot of warfare politics, and I just find it so fascinating. And I just love like reading about all the tactics and how each side sort of attack one another, not in your typical battle fashion, but you know, affecting the environment and causing other sort of issues, taking your enemy down in other ways. So yeah, I love these. Gave them both 5 stars again. I also read for my TBR completion project Dune. I did not like this book. I didn't expect to find a new favourite out of this book since it is a classic sci-fi. I knew there were going to be some things that I took issue with, some language issues, some things like how the women were treated, and I was right with that. But I think what I was really hoping with this was to really love the world, to really love the magic system and even the characters, and I did really enjoy the world, but the rest of it really felt quite flat to me, especially the characters. I thought the plot as well was like basically non-existent, and it really messed up the pace of the book because the book was quite eventful at the very beginning and at the very end, but in the middle it was like a whole lot of nothing. It just kind of dragged for me, honestly. I just go on about this in my vlog, and I think that's enough to say here. If you want to hear more, watch the vlog, because I put myself through this and I don't want to put myself through this here again, you know. I also posted my Animal Companions reading vlog in October, which is where I read books that contain like an animal companion. The first one of that is The Bronchart Daughter. I felt quite middle of the road for this. I gave it, I think, 3.25 stars. I really enjoyed the magic. The magic in here is to do with bone shards, and the only ones who can wield the magic are the royal family, and they use the bone shard to command like these animal, what are they called, animal constructs, which was so interesting. And I really like the layout of the land. It's made up of all these different like islands. It's Asian inspired, and we see a lot of like the different islands because one of the characters is traveling. The main character we follow in here is definitely Lin, who is the Emperor's daughter, and she's trying to train with the magic and to learn it and to also become hopefully the Empress. But she's also sort of set up in this competition against the Emperor's foster son. I didn't like her POV the most at first because she does have memory loss, and she's struggling to remember a lot about her life because she's only had her memories from the last couple of years, and that's just not a trope I enjoy. But I really ended up loving her POV the most in the end because of the magic and how much we got to learn. I think also story-wise her POV progressed the most because she had the most plot and the most going on. And the second character is Jovis, who is a smuggler. He's on the hunt to find his missing wife, and we see him traveling around. He's also the character where we see the animal companion with, and I liked his POV at the beginning the most, I think, because I just love that sense of adventure and that sense of like traveling around. Now the other POVs I really didn't think were much relevant to the story. There are two sapphic characters like who are in a relationship with each other, and they both have their own POV, and their stories sort of annoyed me because I felt like they didn't have their own plot to serve, and I could tell pretty much as soon as we were introduced to them that their story and their plot was really to serve the other characters, and I was right, and that just always annoys me. And a lot of people, when they're selling this book, they describe it as like a sapphic female-female romance, but it's like such a side romance. Like, I don't know, I just feel a little bit cheated, you know? I definitely plan to continue because there was a cliffhanger that I need to know how that's gonna like go in the next book. I'm very intrigued, but yeah, it was overall a little bit disappointing. I am hoping that book 2 is better. We shall see. I also listened to the audiobook of Fussy Nation in that vlog. We follow this guy who works for this company. It's like set in the future, and they are exporting like resources off this planet they've found, and he comes across this creature which he calls fuzzies, and then there's more of them, and it ends up being a really quite interesting novel about like sapiens and like sort of animal rights and the environment and like impact companies can have on the environment. I think what I was most surprised about this was how much like courtroom politics and drama was included. I was not expecting that, but I did quite like it. I didn't like the characters though. The main character was like such a dude bro that he was quite annoying a lot of the time, but like there were really interesting themes, so I ended up giving this like 2.5 stars. I am interested in trying more John Scalzi. I just don't think his characters are going to work for me, but I really enjoyed his themes, so it's a little bit of a conundrum, that one. And the last book I have to talk about today is The Beast Player, which is the last book I read in my Animal Companions vlog, and I adored this. I really recommend this if you are someone who's a fan of Studio Ghibli or anime. It just had those vibes. We follow this young girl who lives in this world where animals, all these beasts, the magical animals of this world, they are used for army purposes and for military purposes and for like the royal family. we just kind of follow basically her life story. Like, we are first introduced to her as a kid and she's an outcast, and then she ends up getting separated from her mother in her village, and she goes off on a journey on her own, and it's just about her and like animal companions, and I love this so much. It's a very quite slow story the entire time, but it really made for a cozy story the way it was told, and it was also just so heartwarming. It does question like the nature of beasts or like magical creatures, and like how much can they be trusted, and like how much in terms of like, can you trust them enough that they're not going to harm you because they are more powerful than you. And it also looks at like how humans take advantage of these creatures, and how these creatures are able to thrive in the wild because they're able to be free and healthy, and how when they're in captivity they're restrained and their health suffers as a result. Really loved this, and I can't recommend this enough. I know this is going on my favourites for the end of the year. I loved it that much, and I need to get to the sequel soon. Okay, so that's it for this wrap up. I finally got there, which I'm so happy about. I really hope you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!